insistence that every word and work of ours begin with you and through you be happily ended through Christ our Lord. Amen. St. Thomas More. Praise God. Son of the Holy Spirit. Poor St. John Fisher, nobody pays attention. I mean, this is terrible. So I was asked to talk about the problem of evil, and I've been puzzling it over. So I have three philosophical questions for you, but I'm going to start by telling you a story. So as you had seen me write on the board before, I'll just put the words up. Is one philosophical question to deal with, is God fair? Another philosophical question to deal with, is God just? And another issue is to go, is that really the right question to ask? Okay. So this is a story from when I was newly ordained. That was my first assignment, so this is back between 1990 and 94. Are you even alive?
No.
And so you were alive. Okay.
I hope so.
You weren't alive, were you?
I was.
Barely.
Yep.
Okay.
I was 4.
So in that parish, I got to know this couple in the context of the birth of their first child, who had a lot of health problems. And over the course of the next 2 years, this baby boy was in and out of the hospital all the time, and he would get better, and he would get worse, and he would get better, and he would get worse. And it was really hard for the mom and the dad. Along the way, the mom got pregnant again, so with baby number 2. So as the pregnancy with baby number 2, a little girl is proceeding, her older brother is declining. And the pivotal moment came. I got a call, I think it was like a Saturday evening, and it was the dad on the phone, and he asked me to go to Fairfax Hospital. And the reason he wanted me to go to Fairfax Hospital was because his daughter was being born, and he couldn't be at Fairfax Hospital because he was at Georgetown University Hospital in D.C., and he was there in the ICU with his 2-year-old son, and they were going to be taking him off life support, and he was going to be dying. And so he wanted to be there with his son, but because he was going to be there with his son, he couldn't be there with his wife and for the birth of their second child. And he said, as soon as things are wrapped up here at the hospital, I'll head across the river and I'll go to Fairfax. I was like, great. So one of the problems in the seminary is in the seminary they fill your head full of philosophy and theology, and they don't necessarily fill your head with a lot of practical stuff. And so this is sort of a tangent. So it wasn't all unusual during especially my first 2 assignments. His persons would come in and they would go blah, 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 about blah, blah, blah. I mean, not to it's not important, but you guys do that sometimes, right? You just go blah, 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 right? And I'm sitting there very earnest because people assume that if you have a Roman collar that you're like an expert on humanity, even if you're 27 years old and 27 years old and don't know anything about anything, right? And they would sit there and they would pour their heart out about their life and their marriage and their family and their problems and their emotional difficulties and psychological difficulties. And I would perspire and I would grip the chair saying the miraculous medal prayer, Mary can see without sin, over and over very quietly. Because if you do it out loud, it doesn't give people an air of confidence, And I was thinking, because I would be thinking, I have no idea what to say. I have no idea what to say. And I have no idea what advice I gave those first 7 years as a priest. I hope it was good. I have no idea if it was good. But all I know is that I didn't know what I was doing. And this trip to the hospital was one of those classic moments, because I get in my car, and I head up 95, and I'm swinging around the Beltway, and I'm both sort of going over in my head, what can I possibly say to help them? And for the very first time in my life, I was mad at God. I'd never been mad at God before. But I thought about the heartache, because I knew this feeling. I thought about the heartache that the mom and the dad had been through, and the heartache of the loss of everything they'd been through with their son, and now that he was dying, and the whole sort of, So I got to the hospital room pretty much about the time that the dad did. And so they were there together in tears, holding their newborn baby daughter, looking at me, and I'm looking at them, and I said, I have to be honest, I have no idea what to tell you. I said, I was coming up here, and I found myself angry at God, and I said out loud in the car, what the hell are you doing to these people? What are you doing to them? And the parents just nodded, we don't understand. We don't understand this. I know I prayed with them a little bit, and I stayed there a little bit, but I didn't have a lot to say. And so when I was asked to kind of talk about this with you guys, that scene comes to mind about, in terms of like a very close, visceral experience of seeming like God isn't fair, or dealing with the reality of evil that doesn't make sense. So, to put it in philosophical terms, I thought a place to begin, I just need to make sure I'm out of here because our high school program at the college started today, so I have to run back for exposition, is we tend to deal with God in terms of the categories of fair and just. And we're often waiting for God to be fair or for God to be just. So, let me throw to you, do you think God's fair? And if you do, I'm going to ask you what you think that means. We're going to have awkward silence for a while. Yes?
I'll bite. You can make the case, yes, because we all have free will to make our own decisions, good and bad, and whether they affect other people is not always necessarily on him, but on us. And so therefore he is fair because he gives us all that intrinsic ability to make our own choices, even though he knows kind of what we're going to do anyways. But it is our choice, and so in that way, it is fair. It may not feel right, but it's fair.
I'll add to that and say that he gives us all different circumstances, though, so in that sense, it's not fair.
This is so messy. So, can we come up with an operational definition of fairness? What does fair even mean? I mean, fair is like a term that 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds we tossed around at that age. It's not fair. It's not fair that she gets the candy. It's not fair. I was going to do an exercise with you where I was going to, and I actually brought all my props with me and decided I'm not going to treat you like little children, even though I really want to. I really want to. And I was going to like randomly hand out money to you, and then ask whole discussion, was that fair? How you got which money? But then it occurred to me that I would be giving you my money. I'm like, I'm not giving them my money. Sorry, go ahead.
How are they different, fairness and justice?
Well, isn't that my question for you?
No. That's crazy.
Like, come on.
I think,
Hang on.
I think like justice, like what do we deserve? Does he give us what we deserve? And fair is more like, are we all treated equally?
All right, so this is about deserve. This is about equality or equity. I'll just use the term equality, but I'm not meaning it in a precise sense. Right, so fair seems to connote somehow of we're all being treated the same. Okay? And justice, actually the technical definition of justice is to render to each according to their due. Okay? And those are operational systems that we use. And so one of the reasons why little kids developmentally make such a big deal about it is because as they transition into, to use the Montessori term, the second plane of development, the little conscience works. And with their little conscience working, they judge everything in terms of justice. And so they're very conscious of being judged and judging others. They're very conscious of morality and rules. They're very conscious of the importance of morality and rules. And so they use that as a category for relationships and parents and siblings and God, and which is a good thing, because if they don't have that, that means something's wrong. So we should. So then the question is, poor fellow here, making a poor, bald seminarian. Right. Is that okay? A little Roman collar. Not so bad. Is God fair?
Well, in the sense that we've just defined, no, because not everyone gets everything equally.
Okay. So, that's not fair. Go ahead.
I mean, I do think God is fair because he gives us all the chance to accomplish the same end. And so if the circumstances might be different, but we all have the chance to do it. The plan is just different.
So I'm going to ask a seminarian a theology question, even though you're studying philosophy. Is that okay?
Sure.
So when the church uses the phrase, formally teaches that God gives everyone sufficient grace to be saved. That's the theological concept that you just articulated, about everyone gets a chance. If you had to flesh that out a little bit.
Sure. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Father, when the church says you have sufficient grace to be saved, that means you may not be in the same circumstances. You may not have the same opportunities or background. Some people may be born to a rich family or a poor family, or in the United States or in Australia or wherever. But in your particular circumstances, He will give you the opportunity and the grace that is necessary for you to achieve salvation. He will provide that to you as a gift.
Okay, so I'm going to interrupt for a second. So I'm going to use an example. Okay, let's pretend that God's plan for you is that you're first a priest and then a bishop and then a pope. Okay, and along the way you discover that as an individual you're kind of a dirtbag, but God's grace of you is going to help you overcome being a dirtbag. So maybe you go to confession a lot, but you're making a lot of effort, and you accomplish a lot of good, and you have this very clear sense that in the course of your life that God is incredibly patient with you. Right?
Yes.
So what's your name, by the way? Aiden. Saint Aiden. So here we're dealing with Saint Aiden. Actually, like Pope Aiden. Is there a Pope Aiden?
I don't think so.
Pope Aiden the First. Who's that? Pope Saint Aiden. Okay. And in your circumstance, we'll have just the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Is you have this thought, my gosh, this talk is so boring. Why am I being tortured? Why doesn't he just shut up and tell us what he's trying to say? Oh, all right, that's a temptation. I really should give in to that temptation of being so disrespectful to this priest who's making this huge sacrifice to come out here. But I'm going to struggle against it. And then as I walk outside to my car to go home, I get hit by a car and die. Okay. In terms of the concept of chance, what I just described is the reality of what God does. God takes lots and lots and lots and lots of time with some people. Lots of time. Lots of opportunities. Lots of chances. And for other people, not a lot. We're here. We get grace. You said yes to grace. So you're going to heaven, which isn't bad, right? But, it's way shorter. And it's hard to stand on the outside and go, well, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. The dirtbag gets to be pope, and he's a saint. Nothing personal, And for all of your struggles, you don't even get to graduate. You're like, it doesn't look fair to me. So the doctrine of everyone is given sufficient grace to be saved means that everyone is given at least enough grace to be saved. But God is more generous with some people than he is with others. That's very clear from the scriptures. He spends more time and energy on some people than he does on other people. He spends more time and energy. He spent more time on the Jews. He chose the Jews. The Jews were nothing. And he devotes all his time and energy to them in a way that he doesn't devote to the pagans, which is the rest of humanity. Go ahead.
Does that mean God has favorites? Is that kind of what it is?
Well,
Favoritism?
John's gospel, he describes himself as a beloved disciple.
Yes.
Yeah. So does God love all of you? Yes. Does he? Okay, trick question, philosophical question. Does God feel the same about all of you? No, God doesn't have feelings. God is God. Feelings are from our material nature. Jesus, in his incarnate reality, has feelings. But as God, he functions at a level above feelings. So does God love all of you? Yes. How do you know? You exist. Okay? So when you study metaphysics, one of the things you're going to learn, this is in terms of the fairness of God, is that reality is contingent. What that means is that there's two kinds of reality. There's necessary reality and contingent reality. Necessary reality is reality that has to exist. Only God is necessary. So if there's necessary reality that has to exist and there's contingent reality that doesn't have to exist, which is everything else, the contingent reality exists because God chooses to make it exist. which means we exist because God is consciously at this moment aware of each of us, holding us in existence. And God doesn't get anything out of it. It's not like we wake up in the morning and the Lord's like, oh, I feel so much better that you're awake now. We can't add, if we could add anything to God, then God would be more like Zeus or Apollo or Thor. I mean, he'd be like a Marvel superhero. But we can't add anything to God, which means everything that God does is out of love for our sake. But he doesn't treat us the same. And so to the extent that we talk about our concept of fairness as equality, it's very clear from the scriptures that he's not fair. Because he doesn't treat us the same. He really doesn't. So if he's not fair, okay, I won't think about blue. Isn't that cool? So weird. Fuchsia. You know what I'm going to do with fuchsia. So if God's not fair, is he just? Is he just? If he's not fair, but he does love us, does he love us? Yes. Okay. Is he just? Is he? Yes, holiness. Please, go ahead.
Let's see how, like, one should be, they kind of like go hand in hand. To be just, you have to be fair.
Well, let's separate them for a second.
Alright.
Let's separate them for a second. So if just is giving people what they deserve,
Yeah.
okay. When you stand in front, when you go to bed tonight, before you do your examination of conscience, and you say your act of contrition, and then you kind of like curl up with your rosary. I don't know if you do that, right? And you look at, and you like imagine having a conversation with God, and you are going to tell him what he owed you. What would you tell him he owed you? What does God owe you? He doesn't owe you anything? Yes? Go ahead.
Well, kind of like a parent owes to their child, like to take care of them, God also takes care of us. No,
Well,
I don't know.
parents, I mean, in terms of biology, parents have a natural bond with their children, and out of the continuation of the species, God designed us that parents love their children so that humanity continues to exist, right? So there are natural reasons why parents are attached to their children, in spite of what dirtbags children can be. It's not you guys, as other children can be at times. So that parents have a responsibility for their children. But who established that responsibility? Because in different cultures, it's different. It's not the same throughout all of humanity, and it hasn't been the same throughout all of history. I mean, during the time of Christ, children born in the Roman Empire, the mother would present the child to the father. And if he's like, I don't want to deal with this, he would take the child out into the desert and leave it there. And that was considered perfectly acceptable. It was a perfectly acceptable situation. So what we take for granted in terms of this Christian notion of the responsibility of parents for their children, it's very contingent on Christianity, which, thank you, Jesus, that we have that. So does God owe us anything? A snack? A nap? Snickers bar? Right. Well, go ahead.
I mean, no, because we don't deserve it, but I feel like because of who he is as a loving God, like if he's going to act in accordance with his nature, like he's going to provide for us. Like he wouldn't create us if he weren't going to provide for us.
So is it possible then that with God creating us, there's a promise that comes with it?
Yeah.
Which means, strictly speaking, God doesn't owe us,
Yeah.
but we can say he's faithful to his promises. Okay, so our relationship with God then doesn't start with fairness, even though the 5-year-old or 7-year-old in us wants it to. And we would like it to be just, because that's more the rational, you enter into rationality than in grade school and can think about things and apply principles. So we would love to say that God is just, but we go, he doesn't really owe us anything. But when we actually enter into, so I could paint a smile on his face. But when we realize that he actually is completely faithful to his promises, then that changes everything. So the question that we can ask to turn it back to the top is, does God promise everyone the same thing? No, he doesn't. Right? And so each of us, and that's where then an individual faith life really matters, God promises each of us some things in common, like sufficient grace to be saved. But other than that, we actually really do have a unique combination of hardships and blessings and graces and opportunities that are unique to each of us as individuals. Now, that's hard to see when you're all wearing the same golf shirts. Well, in other words, when you're in a culture where basically there's some kind of uniformity, it's hard to see the individuation. Or it looks sort of like decorations on a cake, but we all have a cake, okay? But if I took all of you and we got into a plane and we flew over to Pakistan and met with a group of 17 to 20-year-olds in Pakistan, we would go, wow, our life is nothing like theirs. Our life is nothing like theirs. And then you can begin to see the difference. And so then the question is, if their circumstances are so different than ours are, if they don't even have a realistic opportunity to hear the gospel because they live in a Muslim country, let alone their material circumstances, let alone the way women are treated in that culture, all of your marriages would be busy being arranged by your parents, by the way, ladies. And all of you guys, you're way too young to get married. And celibacy is just seen as a horrible thing, so they'd kill you or something like that. And we look at that and go, so we go back to the mom and the dad and the two children and go, what is God doing? What is God doing? I mean, we have the blessing of being in the United States with at least materially and culturally all that we have. But most of humanity's not. I mean, there are 8 billion people on the planet and there are only 330 million Americans. So we're a tiny percentage of the population of the world. So then what's God doing? We have to go back to sad face. What do you think? Go ahead.
Well, perhaps to God, the hardships of, say, poverty, for example, like you were bringing up, could be an opportunity to develop virtue in people.
That's if someone's guiding them to what virtue is.
That's true.
But if they're not being guided to it, in other words, we don't come up with the concept of virtue on our own. We have some natural attachment to it, but if we're not being taught it, we normally aren't going to go there.
I mean, like, God permits evil so that, like, he can create greater goods. I mean, I know that, like, what is it, Job? Like, he permitted Satan to do all that terrible stuff to Job and let it happen to Job just so, like, he could.
So that Job could become a better man.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, like.
So God's busy trying to take half of humanity and their misery and horrible circumstances. So we don't have to become better. No, that can't be it. Well, they really have to become better. So they're poor and miserable and morally challenged. Well, I don't want to say that. God's looking really mean at this point. It's like, mean God. I'm not comfortable going there. But it has something to do with that. So, let's go to the beginning. Let's do theology. Let's go to the beginning. How did it all start? At the beginning. 250 million years ago. 250,000 years ago. So we're pretty sure Adam and Eve were alive 250,000 years ago. Do you know how we know that? From genetic studies. That the human gene pool began about 250,000 years ago. So we've been on the planet for about 250,000 years. I mean, I have, you guys haven't. So way back when there were Adam and Eve, because every species begins species do begin with original couples. That's not just theology, that's biology. What was the deal? What was going on back then? test implies we don't know how it's going to come out, right? So Adam and Eve were given, well, before that, they were given everything, right? And part of everything is life and choice. They were given everything. And it was God's plan that, they are in the Garden of Eden, but then after that like brief sort of 2-week stay in that like Eden bed and breakfast, you know, then it's time to go back to like harsh humanity? Is that the plan?
No, it wasn't.
What was the plan?
To live in that sort of like,
Alone,
yeah.
right? What about us? Was that planned for us too? Holy Father, please.
Only do this and
Say it again.
maybe do this and sort of.
So what the church teaches, has always taught, is that that original endowment that was given to Adam and Eve was intended for all of humanity. They didn't just hurt each other and hurt themselves. They robbed us. They robbed us of a perfect human nature. They robbed us of extraordinary graces and gifts. They robbed us of a relationship with God. And what they left us was with broken humanity that aspires to the good but can't achieve the good on its own, that doesn't want to suffer, but suffering is inescapable. I mean, I honestly, when I get to heaven, hope and pray, you know, it's like seminarians, they always say, you know, when I get ordained, God willing, you know. So when I get to heaven, God willing, I'm going to greet my mom, give her a big hug, greet my dad, give him a big hug, thank my guardian angel for all the work that he did to get me there. Christ is working really hard. I'm sure I'll say hello to Our Lady, because she's a big part of it too. And I'm going to write to Adam and Eve, and I'm going to greet them warmly, and I'm going to say, what were you thinking? What was going on with you today? And I actually want to I'm looking forward to that conversation, because I've read different theories that different theologians and fathers of the church and doctors of the church have come up with. They kind of make sense, they kind of don't make sense. So God's plan was never that we had to contend with this. That was never his plan. Right? The thing is that since God's outside of time, this is part of the nature of providence, and God sees, the thing is, so for example, if one of you receives a prophecy about something that you're going to be doing when you're 35 years old, so you're fading, let's say you have like a Joseph kind of moment, and you go to bed, and an angel appears to you, and in your conversation with the angel, it's revealed to you that when you're 35 years old, you'll be whatever. And you wake up and you go, wow, that was amazing. And you tell your mom and dad, and they go, are you okay? That seems kind of weird. So the reason why God can tell us something today about what we're doing in the future isn't because he then makes the future fixed. It's because God's in the future. And so our future is present to God right now. So God now sees what we're going to be doing in our future. Just like God, so God's present to us now, God's present to us in our future, and God's present to us in our past. God's outside of time. So because God's outside of time, God knew Adam and Eve were going to do what they're going to do. It's still unacceptable and inexcusable. So it's not like God was surprised, like, oh, now I've got to have a contingency plan. Like, I moved the board and I don't know because why the board isn't turning on. It's not an experience. Sorry. It's not an experience like, you know, God calls one of the angels, hey, I moved the board. What happened? What do we do with this now? The angel's like, Lord, stop moving the board around, okay? Please stop. And so human existence has unfolded the way it has, but now we have to deal with the problem of evil. But it was never the plan. And so one of the things that we're supposed to walk away with from the Adam and Eve story is how profoundly interdependent we are. Now our Lord says, to him to whom more has been given, more is required. So everyone who is living in the United States and Western Europe and Canada and Japan at this moment too, that should both inspire us and have the blood run cold in our veins. We are endowed with wealth and education and opportunity, not for our sakes, but for all those people out there who don't have what we have. And at the end of our life, part of the way we're judged is, well, what did you do with what I gave you so that you could be there to help those people? And it's very easy to become very insular, especially because of the cell phone world we live in. You know, for a lot of people, their universe exists in this tiny little device that they hold in their hand and they're plugged into their ear, and that's their universe. Now, it first hit me actually 6-7 years ago. I was wandering around Old Town Alexandria. Old Town Alexandria, great place to visit, right? Nice restaurants, good, nice, just places to wander around. And I realized that the zombie apocalypse had actually occurred. You know, it's not a myth, it's actually real. Because I would walk by a group of people this size, I would walk by them, and they would be silent. Because they're all looking at their smart devices. And I'm like, you have 10 people in close proximity to one another, and no one's talking to each other. It is so bizarre. So things like that, in terms of the technological development and change in our culture, it makes it really hard to connect with other people. I mean, we have the tools to connect with other people, but we don't really connect with other people. So the problem of evil isn't just a personal thing. So I have the good things and the hard things in my life. I have the inspirations from God that I have, you know, and I have the struggles that I have. And in one sense, it's very personal. It's part of the path of getting you to heaven. Because the path each of us goes to heaven is a different path. But the problem of evil is also about our larger responsibility to everybody else. And so, in effect, what God tried 2,000 or a quarter of a million years ago with Adam and Eve, he's never stopped. He's never stopped saying to us, you really need to take care of each other. You really, really do need to take care of each other. And I'm giving you free will so you can voluntarily take care of each other. Because I don't want to have to hold a gun to your head. Now, ultimately, none of it makes sense, and this is where the faith kicks in. None of it makes sense if there's no heaven and hell. Because if there's a heaven and hell, there really is an eternal reward, and there really is eternal justice. And that's part of the Job story, because Job didn't understand the concept of eternity the way we do. And so that's why there are several, actually, books in the Old Testament where they really wrestle with the nature of evil and the mystery of evil and the suffering of the innocent. And in the end, they all go, we have no idea how this works itself out. It's only with Christ and the revelation of heaven and hell, of an eternal life, that we can go, oh, you mean it doesn't have to all be resolved here? And the answer is no, it doesn't all have to be resolved here. Does that kind of make sense? Would it have been better if I just handed money out to all of you at the very beginning? So, I have to run back. Do you have any questions? Sir?
Now, you said that God gives sufficient grace to all people for them to be saved.
That's doctrine.
Yes.
It's also St. Paul talking to Tim.
Yeah. So when you say that, though, could you elaborate on what you mean by gives exactly? Do you mean more offers? Because it seems that a number of people certainly reject it.
Yes.
So, clarify that.
So, grace is a term that St. Paul uses to talk about God being active in a person's life. Grace isn't a thing. Grace is God. Okay. So, you know, back to Pope Aidan, you know, who was, again, with respect, who was the dirtbag for so much of his life. And as he would enter into his dirtbag moments, God would be in his life and say, go back to confession, go back to confession, and you really should say the rosary. And he would be like, oh yeah, you're right, I should. And he would try and fail and try and fail. And he would do this with him over and over again, which means not only was he given the minimal grace to be saved, God was incredibly generous with him. But God doesn't take the same amount of time with everybody. I mean, we just know that. Right? Some people get almost no time at all. Think about this, roughly 1/3 to 1/2 of children who are conceived are never successfully born. They're people, just like we are. But God creates them, they're in their mother's womb, and then they're in eternity with God. And so their first conscious experience, because babies only, this is my only theology, I can't prove this, babies only exist in this life, because babies are a matter of this body. Whereas a newly conceived child in his mother's womb has a full human soul, just like you and I do. The difference between them and us is that we have a functioning body at a much higher level than they do. So when those tiny little babies enter into eternity and are in the presence of God, there's nothing stopping their soul from functioning. And so their first conscious experience of themselves is also a conscious experience of God. So God doesn't even give them a chance to sin. That's what's so interesting. He doesn't even let them sin. He's just like, no, you're blind. Come here. You're going to be happy for all eternity. Whereas those of us who have entered into the world, part of us entering into the world is we're here for mission. There's a project. But for some people, the project is a really tiny project, like just get to heaven. For other people, the project is help lots of people get to heaven. And all of that is part of the mix then of how much time and energy God takes with some people versus how much time and energy God takes with others. And sometimes it's God works with people directly, and with other people he works with them indirectly. Like I'm going to do lots in this person's life so that he can do lots of things in other people's lives. Does that kind of...
This one.
So what God promises is the minimum. But he doesn't give everyone the minimum. Some people he devotes a lot more time and energy to than others. But it's not because they're better people by themselves, it's because God has a plan for them. So, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. O Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Everybody, God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That way? Yes.